So we're looking at week number 5 of the weekly activities for grade 12. And the first question here is 2.1, which is relating to this annexure of a statement. And our first question is asking us, what is the reference number Bangiwe must use should she pay her account? So this was quite straightforward because it quite literally tells you over here, use this reference for your payment, and it's the BGD 0016. So you just had to write down BGD 0016. The next question is asking you give one reason why reference numbers are used when making a payment. Well, as a general knowledge thing, it's got to do with that it's easy for the company to look up the invoice that you are referring to. It's easy for the clients to trace your transaction. You could write it that way. That's basically what it's got to do with as well. You could also say something more generalized, as just saying like for filing purposes or for record purposes. That would also be acceptable. Okay. The next one says they calculate the missing value A, which has been omitted from the statement. So if we look at the statement over here, we can see the missing value A is actually our balance after a transaction. So these balance columns are running balance columns. So it's basically the total after a given transaction has taken place. And in this case, we can see it would have been after this payment over here. And they actually tell you it's a credit settlement payment. So we need to know what is the balance on this account after that payment's gone off. Now, if you're not sure what's going on with this payment, a very easy way to see what's happening is if you look at a transaction. So let's, for example, take this first one over here. The question is, if it was a debit and I looked at the balance before it and afterwards, right? Let me actually do it so that we can see the values. If I look at the value before, the 894, and the value afterwards, right? You can see that the debit has made the balance go up. So therefore, if the debits are making the balance go up, the credit is going to have the opposite effect. It's going to bring it down. Now, they have been very nice in showing us there's a little negative next to the 3, but sometimes they won't have a negative and they'll expect you to understand it's doing the opposite to what the credit is, or to what the debit is. So if a debit's making my balance on my account go up, so the amount that I owe go up, credit is going to bring it down. So all I need to do here is just do a nice straightforward subtraction calculation. So I'm going to go 3205,51 and subtract the 3206. Okay, and when you subtract those, you are going to get a negative answer because you can see they did overpay by 49 cents. So we're just going to say our balance over here should be negative 0.49. That's my answer for that one. All right. Then if we look at 2.1.4, they tell us over here that the total due for this invoice is 2,340.73 cents. This includes VAT, and they want us to calculate the amount due excluding VAT. So this is quite straightforward. It's just simply removing VAT. So I'm just going to go onto a blank page for this. All right, and when we are removing VAT, we are dividing with it. So all I'm going to do is take that balance, the 2,340.73. They tell us it includes VAT. So to get rid of the VAT, I'm going to divide 1,15, and the 15 being because it's 15% VAT, which they do tell us in the question. And when you do that, you should get to a final answer of 2,035,42. Right. There is also the option, instead of dividing by 1,15, some of us prefer to use the multiplying by 100 over 115. Right? So depending on the method that you work with, one of those two options will get you to the right result. Okay. Then we say here, calculate to 2 decimal places the standard levy for June as a percentage of the total amount due. So let's go look at our statement again. Okay, so we look for the standard levy in June, and it tells me over there the levy in June was 30 Rand and 90 cents. And they want to know what is that as a percentage of the total amount due. Oh, I do apologize. Actually, I see that there are 2 levies that they mentioned relating to June. We've got the levy CSOS, but if you look actually higher, we've got standard levy for June. And given that the question specifically says standard levy for June, we're going to go for the one that actually matches that. So that's our portion that we're concerned with. They're wanting a percentage, which always tells us a fraction. And they want it as a fraction of the amount due in the statement. And the amount due in the statement is there in bold at the bottom there, the 2,340. So to make that percentage, all that we're going to do is create a fraction. And we're just going to say, okay, the part we're concerned about is the 1498,63. That up a bit, as a fraction out of our total, which was 2,340,73. And because we want it as a percentage, we're going to times by 100 to turn that into the percentage. And when that is done, you should get to 64,02. It actually kind of keeps going on. So we always showed unrounded force, 0230, and then you can do ... just to say that we know it goes there. And then they wanted rounded because our question actually did specifically say to us, we want rounded to 2 decimal places over there. So if we do that, we should get to 64,02%. And that's our final answer. Remember, you always show the unrounded version first, because if you've made a mistake somewhere along the line, you can potentially still get partial marks, either by rounding correctly from the incorrect value, or if you rounded incorrectly, you could still get the partial marks on the value before the rounding. All right. Then we've got 2.6, and they say here, write down a possible payment option Rango Property Specialist will accept. Okay, so if we look at the bottom here, that kind of information is normally either at the top, right, at the top of our statement here. Currently there's nothing up there, or it's at the bottom with the terms and conditions. And in this case, we can see, if I look at the terms and conditions, we've got a few bits of information here. Let me just get rid of all this calculation from the last question. Okay, and we can see that they do give us banking details. So that implies that we can make a bank payment. Oops, there we go, bank payments. And they also tell us over here, checks may be payable to body corporate. So that implies that we can do a check. And importantly here, they do tell us no cash payment. So we can't use cash. So for answering the purposes of the question, possible payment option, they also say a possible payment option. So you could have used either checks or bank payments. Direct bank payments would have also been accepted for this. All right, given they say a possible payment, you only list one. If they had said write down the possible payment options, implying multiples, then you would need to state more than one to get the marks. All right. And then our last sub-question for this invoice, they tell us here, Blueberry Gardens has 49 units in total. Calculate the total amount collected by the body corporate if all 49 units pay their levy CSOS on the 1st of July. Okay, so this is quite straightforward. We just have to first go and see what is the CSOS levy for July. Make sure you are doing the right month. In this case, the CSOS levy for June and July were the same, but sometimes they'll do one that will change per month. So we want to make sure we are looking at July, and it's over there. It tells us it's 30 Rand 90 for a payment, and that's for 1 unit. They have 49 units, so we're just going to go 30, 90. I'll just move this up. times by 49 units. Okay, and again, a nice straightforward one here. And our answer will be 1514, 10. Okay, and you may be looking at that going, where are those 3 marks coming from? That looks like 2 marks. Well, the third mark is actually on having the right value there. So you would have, let's do this in a different color. You would have gotten a mark for knowing the value there, a mark for your multiplying, and then your answer mark. Okay, so sometimes we give some nice marks on a fairly straightforward question. Right, let's look at question 2. Okay, so question number 2 is all about Bongiwe with the twins Sandile and Sakile, who are attending a private school. They tell us some information about the fees. And the first thing we're asked is to calculate the total transport cost for twins for the full school year. Okay, so let's see what we know about our transfer costs. If we look over here, the only thing that they tell us about transport is in this last bullet, about the monthly transport cost being 929 Rand. The other thing that's important here is they do tell us here that fees are payable per child for the months January to November. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So if she had 1 child, she would have paid 929. We know she's got 2, so I'm just going to say here, fine, 9, give myself a bit more space here, 929 times 2 because it's twins, and they want it for the full school year, not for just the month, and also not for the year itself. So we're not going to times it by 12, we're going to times it by 11 because they tell us the school year is January to November, so just timesing that by 11 months as well. And if you multiply those all together, you're going to get to the total transport costs of 20,438 and no cents. So you don't even actually need to show the cents there, but you can. Okay. Next question, 2.2.2, and this is 8 marks, so that tells you it's going to be quite a bit of calculation. We're told Bongiwe intends on paying the school fees in full on the 30th of January. Determine the total amount she will spend in 1 school year for the twins to attend the private school, including the aftercare and the transport. Okay, so we've already done the transport, so we just need to remember we need to add that in at the end. But let's see what else we know here. Okay, so firstly, they do tell us that they're charging aftercare at the school. So let's use colors to highlight this. So aftercare is charged 7,700 per school year. Remember, this is all for 1 child, and she's got 2. So I'm just going to list that as my first fee, 770. They tell us the first child's school fee is 2,793 per month, or 30,723 Rand. So I'm going to list that. She's paying it as a one-off, so I can do the 30,723 Rand. They then tell us that a 10% discount is given to the second child. So we're going to need to do something separately with the second child. So let's divide it first. If this is child A, we're going to have child B separately. She's also going to pay for aftercare, 770. And then we're going to add in our school fees, but we know that this is discounted. So 3723 minus 10% of 3723. So we take off the discount, okay? And notice that is given to the second child. It's not given to both of them because there's 2 children. Then we're also told a further 7.5% discount is given if school fees are paid by the 31st of January. Now, that is a discount that is given to both children. So that tells us that that discount is actually going to come on later, once we have our total of everything she needs to pay. All right, so let's give that discount as well. And the discount is coming on to the school fee amount because it's a discount on school fees. There's no mention of that discount being applied also to the aftercare or to the monthly transport. So child A is going to get a 7.5% discount. So I'm going to say this 30,000 minus 7.5% of 30,000, 723. And then this second child, I'm going to take how much his school fees are, which actually I can just first calculate how much that is, which is going to be 27,650, 70. And I'm going to again subtract the discount of the 7.5% of that child's school fees, the 27,650. Okay, so you could actually do this entirely doing one child and then go back and do the second child rather than working across both at once as I am. That's also perfectly fine. Okay, so let's take a look then. So child A, when we calculate all together, we've got the 774 aftercare. We've got when we take off our school fees, okay, 28,418,775. So that means child A is going to give me 36,118,775. I'm going to add to that child B. And that's just for the purposes of dividing what's going on over here. Maybe let's do this in a different color rather than having these in the same colors over here. There we go. And when you calculate that one out, gives me 33,276, 8975. And then just remember with that, we also needed to add in our transport from the previous question, because we have to add the transport in as well for both children. And that was 20,438 and no cents. And then if we add that together, child A, child B, and their transport. By the way, you could have also done the transport when you were doing how much is transport for child A, added in, child B added in, and then put it all together. The only reason I didn't do that is because we already had that transport amount. We don't need to recalculate it. And when you add all of those together, we're going to get to our final answer of 89,833,6725. And because this is money, we're going to round to 2 decimal places and get to 89,833 and 67 cents. And that would be our final answer. Right, with something like this, remember there are other ways you could have set out your working. You could have first worked out what would be the school fees in total. So child A plus child B, take off your discounts. Then you could have worked out the homework separately and said how much was the homework for all of them, transport, and then combined it. There are a few different ways you could set your working out for this. But you should still get back to that same 89,833 and 67 cents. Okay, so with these kind of questions when they come up, the important thing to note with this is it's not particularly in-depth calculation. There was no interest, there was no tax. It was quite straightforward. It was more a case of making sure you're reading what's going on and paying attention to the details, right? 2 children, the prices are per child. In the earlier question, we had to take into account that the charges for transport was for 11 months, not for 12, because the school year runs till November. The discount was 10% for the second child, and then they still get 7.5% for the early payments. So all of those kind of details, when you're going through your calculations, make sure you go back and double check you haven't skipped something out, because that's more what normally happens with these questions. It's not so much the calculations, which are percentage based, it's more are we missing little details that come in these information blocks? All right. Okay, let's move on to question 3. All right, question number 3 was all about the livestock numbers. And the important thing that I want us to notice before you go anywhere in this question is that these numbers are given in thousands. They tell us in the little blurb at the top. They do tell us also in the heading, right? And they tell us in the heading in the table itself as well. So we're actually being told in multiple places about the factors in thousands. It's important that we remember this because when you're answering your values, you need to be specifying if you're working in thousands. You can't just write the number and expect that to be the final answer. Okay, so the first thing we get asked is write down the province with the second highest number of sheep in February 2021. So important thing here is we are looking in February 2021. You always want to cross-check with these kind of questions that you are working in the right column. So I'm just going to highlight it. And they want the second highest number. So if we look, the highest number would have been the 6 for the Eastern Cape. So the second highest would have been the Northern Cape. And they do tell us here they want us to write down the province, not the value. So we can just write down the province of Northern Cape. Okay. Next one says calculate Eastern Cape's estimated total number of livestock for August 2020. So again here it's quite important that we are working with the right months. So let me take off this previous question and we're going to be working with Eastern Cape. So I'm going to just go across and say, okay, I'm working with this one, August 2020, this one, and this one. Right, cattle, sheep, and goats. So if we want the total number, remember total always means combined. So we are adding. So all we're going to do is say, okay, we got 3050 plus 6513 plus 1991. And the important thing here to remember, we said they were all in thousands. So you can still add them as values like this. And on your calculator, you still put those values. But I am going to put a little note here to say that this is in thousands in there. And then, more importantly, is then when I get my final answer, and I just add that together, I'm going to get to 11,554. And then again, I'm just going to say here, 1,000. Now at this stage, we need to check if the question asks us to write it out in full. It doesn't, so you would get the marks if you left it in this format, but you could also at this stage, and if you're going to need the answer later on, you probably are going to want to write it in the full format. We're going to write this out in thousands, which is just 11,554, and thousands are 3 zeros on the end. Okay. And by the way, another way, just if you're not sure how to convert from the one format to the other, just multiply it by the value. So in this case, it was thousands. I'm just going to say 11,554 times by 1,000. Okay, if it was millions, I would just times it by a million to work it forward. All right. And then our last question over here, I'm just going to remove the whoops. There we go. Just going to remove this questions from the last one. They tell us here that the provincial mean number of sheep is 2,400,444. A farmer in Limpopo therefore stated that the value of A is less than 200. Verify whether this farmer's statement is valid. Okay, so this is a working backwards with the mean question. And these questions they love to ask, so it's worth making sure you know how to work mean backwards. Sometimes it will be asked with median or with range comes up as well, but mean is the one that comes up more consistently than the others. So it's worth knowing, making sure you know how to work backwards with mean. Okay, so let's look at the values we have. So they tell us that the mean for sheep, the provincial mean for sheep is 2 million. So where is our provincial mean for sheep? Okay, so we can see we're working in August 2020. I do feel like they're kind of missing a piece of information because they should have specified, whoops, that they were working in August of 2020 and not 2021. But we can imply that from the question as well, because we can see here that we're also missing that total. Okay, so let me pop this onto a new page so we can work with it. Okay, so working backwards at the mean, there's a few different ways you can think about it. I'm going to explain it with a step-by-step process that you can pretty much memorize and follow. So when we're doing this working backwards, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply the mean by the number of elements. Now, what do I mean by number of elements? Well, the number of elements is talking about how many numbers are in my data set, how many numbers went into creating and calculating that mean. And if we look at our table over here, and I just count my way up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm including the A because we know they used that when they found the mean in the first place. 8, 9. So I'm going to start by multiplying my given value, the mean of 2,400,444, and I'm going to multiply it by 9 because I have 9 numbers in my data set. Okay, if I do that and I multiply that by 9, I'm going to get 21,603,996. Okay, that's my first step. The second step that we want to do here, so step number 2, is going to be subtracting our known values. What do I mean by that? By known values, the values in my data set that I already know. So in this case, I pretty much know all of them except for A. So I'm going to take that answer there and subtract all of these values I know. But there is one thing I need to remember here. This number here is the full number. These values on the table are in thousands. So if I'm going to be subtracting them, I need to be either first moving them out of thousands into their full values, or I need to make this 21 million into the thousands format. Now, for me personally, I don't like moving into the thousands format because generally your final answer you don't really like in that format anyway. So I'm rather going to write, as I subtract these, write them into thousands. And you'll remember from the last question, the way to do that is just multiply each of them by 1,000. Okay, so if I'm going to do this, I'm going to say 21,603,996, and I'm going to start subtracting. So the first one I'm subtracting is 2,545,000. Okay, I'm also going to subtract 5,182,000. And I kind of keep going with this with all of my values that I know. 4,330,000. Okay, I'll write the rest of them quickly for us. Okay, and when I subtract all of those and I do that all onto a calculator, I come out with 198,996. And if you kind of think about that, that does make sense because, well, it's kind of in the range of all the other values that I have, right? So that now is telling me the number that is missing. This is now my A value. Okay, now the only issue here though is that this is my A value out of the table, so not in the thousands format. So if it was in the table, it would be in the thousands format. So when they're saying here in our question that the missing A value in the table is less than 200, they're actually meaning less than 200,000. Okay, so the way I would show this, just so that my examiner knows that I'm understanding what's happening with 1,000, is I would say 200 is actually going to be 200,000. So A is 200,000, and I would actually just say 200,000, which is 200,000. Therefore, and she said it would be under that, we would say she is correct. Okay, the other way you could show this instead is by showing this value and just saying therefore A itself would actually be 198,996, dividing by 1,000 to put it back into that thousands format. Okay, and because they use the word verify, we must state at the end verify.